In this video we're going to take a look at the basics of submitting radio form values. Essentially we're going to be creating a form and creating a couple of radio buttons and seeing how this data is passed through to PHP and how we can sort of pick up on that and display that out to the user or do something with it. Obviously you're going to have a different use for it than I am. So we're going to be creating our form inside of index.php, and process.php is going to handle our data. So in our browser at the moment we have got nothing. My URL here, I've saved this in the folder checkboxes. Don't let this confuse you. It's just a variation of the checkbox tutorial, which if you haven't seen you might want to go and take a look at if you're new to PHP. But don't let that confuse you. We're going to be looking at radio buttons. So let's first of all go ahead and build our form, and for those of you that aren't perhaps great at HTML and haven't dealt much with forms, this will help you. So we're going to say form action equals something. That's going to be process.php. I always like to outline the form before I actually do anything else. So we've got an action and a method. The action is going to be process.php, and the method for now is going to be get. We're going to be using get so we can see the values that we're submitting in the URL bar, so we can sort of take a look at them, and then we can interpret how we're going to process these with PHP, how we're going to either display them out to the user, store them, whatever you're going to be doing with them. So for now it's going to be get. A bit later in the tutorial we'll change that to post, and we'll see how that changes. So at the moment we still have literally nothing on the page, but I'm going to go ahead and create a paragraph, and inside here I'm going to create a couple of radio buttons, and I'm going to allow a user to choose either radio button, and obviously this list can be endless, but we're going to allow the user to choose a radio button based on perhaps their favourite programming language. So let's go ahead and outline the structure. So we've got a type, a name, and a value, and these are all the attributes that you would expect for an input field in HTML. And let's go ahead and put a break after that, a line break. Now the type is just going to be radio. The name needs to stay the same for every radio button that you want to be within a specific group. So in this case I'm going to call it language, and I'm going to obviously create, let's say, 3 of these radio buttons. The first one I'm going to say PHP, and then after this PHP, this is sort of the human readable label in our form. So let's go ahead and refresh. You can see we've got the radio button here and then PHP here. Let's go and copy this line, and we'll copy it down 3 times. Now language needs to stay the same, like I said. Obviously radio needs to stay the same because we're using the same type of input field. Language is literally going to just group these so we can only select one of these 3 items. So the next I'm just going to say, let's say C, and then down here we'll say basic. So just 3 programming languages, basic. So now when we refresh we've got 3 of these, PHP, C or basic, and you can see that we can't select more than one. Now if these vary at all, so language 2 and language 3 for example, if they vary that means they're no longer grouped, so we can select 3 of them, which obviously we don't want because we only want the user to be able to select one value. Okay, so under here let's we'll get rid of this last break just here for now, and we'll go ahead and create a submit button. So input type equals submit, and we'll give that a value of just submit. This is what's displayed to the user. Okay, so we've got our submit button which goes through to process.php. You can see we've got a question mark here. Following on from this will be the data that we submit in the form, i.e. which one of these radios we selected. So let's go ahead and test this out a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and choose PHP. When I click submit it says language equals PHP. So we've now set a get variable called language with the value PHP, and we'll pick up these in just a bit with our process.php page. If I was to select C and click submit, you see we get more or less the same thing. but language now is equal to C. And then basic as well does exactly the same thing. So we've got this variable essentially called language, which is equal to either of these three items depending on which one we select. And obviously, since they're grouped, they're always going to be one value to that variable. So inside process.php now, we want to go ahead and pick up on this, and just for the purpose of this tutorial, we're just going to alert it out to the user, or print it to the page, or echo it to the page. Okay, so let's go ahead and create some PHP tags. Now the first thing we want to do is make sure that this variable is actually set. If we go ahead and try and echo out a variable that isn't set, PHP will return an error if you have that level of error reporting on. So it's always best to check if this variable is set. So if you've watched the PHP Academy tutorials on get and post variables, if you haven't, go back after this video and watch them, because obviously it will make a lot more sense what I'm about to do. Then we need to use this get variable to pick up this, considering we have used the method get. So I'm literally just going to go if, create an if statement block. So we've got if and a condition inside here, a starting curly brace and an ending curly brace, and I'm going to say $_get and the variable name, which remember is language, and around this variable I want to check is set. So I'm saying is set bracket and end bracket. So if I just take this out, it'll make a lot more sense. So if is set, and what we want to check if it's set is get language. Then what I'm going to do is, for now I'm just going to say echo it's set. Okay, and I've just escaped that character there. So if I just click submit, we go through to process.php, we don't see any text. If I click on PHP and click submit, it says it's set. However, we don't know this value yet, or we do know it, but we haven't stored it for echoing out. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new variable called language, and that's going to be equal to $_get language. So essentially what we're doing is we're checking whether this variable has been passed to this page or not. If it has been passed, it makes sense to then place it in another variable to be used later on in our script. And in this case, I'm just going to echo out you selected, and then a space, and then I'm going to append on, or with a comma, append on language. So that will essentially just take this value, the value that the user selected in the radio button. We're checking if that's set, we're then storing it in a variable called language, and then we're echoing it out to the user. So let's go ahead and just hit refresh. The first thing I'm going to select is PHP. When we click submit, it says you selected PHP, fine. When I click C, I click submit, you selected C, that's fine. When I click basic, submit, you selected basic. Now let's just go ahead and get rid of this, and I'll show you the reason that we included that in the first place. So let's say our user navigates over to process.php. We get this notice undefined index language in, and then it tells us which line, and we get you selected nothing. Now if we include this check, so let's just pop that back in there, and we refresh, nothing happens because the variable isn't actually set up here. So it's important that we include an is set just to double check to avoid any nasty errors appearing where we don't want them to, or users actually being able to carry out or these couple of lines execute when they're not really needed to execute if nothing's set. So I'm going to go ahead and just change this to post, and you'll see that we're no longer going to see this in the URL bar. It's all going to be done in the background using post data. Again, if you haven't seen the PHP Academy videos on get and post variables, now's probably the time to do so. So let's go back to our form and let's refresh. When I select PHP and click submit now, you see that we don't see this in the URL bar, but we've still passed through this variable and picked up on it, and the same with the others as well. So that's a basic guide to radio boxes and sort of looking at values of them in PHP.